swanning around. It was around 9:30 p.m. and I could see the old man was already half tanked. Not just see, but hear it too. He'd got a little looser and louder and become a bit more flamboyant, was waving his arms around like a windmill. I was enjoying our house party and I liked that he put me in charge of the record player. I'd been standing alongside the HMV stereo from when the first guests arrived. That way I got a good long look at them all, usually before they spotted me, and that made me feel more comfortable. Besides, I liked sliding the records in and out of their sleeves, and I was good at getting the diamond stylus in the right spot just before easing it down on the vinyl. 5 couples had arrived soon after 7, some that I didn't really know very well. All the men were standing around the bar that Dad built, mostly drinking glasses of beer from the dozen long necks he'd put on ice that afternoon. He had frosty glasses from the freezer, and all the men commented that he'd gone to a fair bit of trouble. They were talking too about what a great job he'd done in building the bar. 3 of the men, including my old man, were drinking whiskey chasers. Most of the ladies were in a huddle at the other end of the lounge room, drinking bubbly, but my mum and Elvie were drinking shandies. I was drinking lemonade because I was only 10, but that was a real treat because usually we kids just got to drink Anchor Bobo cordial, which was nice, but it didn't have any bubbles. I was in charge of my little brother Mark. He was 3 years younger than me, and if he saw a beer glass left unattended, he'd always go and have a sip. I didn't like the taste. It was much too bitter for me. It was good seeing everyone dressed up. Mum was wearing her olive green party dress which had a flared skirt. The skirt had 6 rosettes stitched to it, and they were as big as an adult's hand. She wore a pearl necklace and she smelled like flowers from the perfume she'd dabbed on earlier. Dad was happy because she was wearing black stockings with a seam down the back of them. Earlier that night, before anyone had arrived, she'd walked into the lounge room after getting dressed and spun around in a circle in front of Dad. "What do you think?" she said. Dad wolf whistled then and Mum was beaming, but she went a bit red too. That was when Dad said, "You got the best pair of pins in Adelaide, love. You look bloody beautiful." Les and Vonnie were the first couple to arrive, and Vonnie looked really pretty too. Dad whistled at her, but not quite as loudly. Then Bluey and Elvie arrived. They were our favourite neighbours and only lived 2 houses away. Elvie always wore a band-aid on her upper arm at parties, but she wasn't hurt. She just used it to hide a tattoo. Jack and Adie came about the same time as Ted and Barb, and then Jeannie came in with Len. Len had been to the races and was soon bragging to everyone about how much money he'd won. He came in with a bottle of whiskey. Dad reckoned it was top shelf. I didn't have much to do after I put a new record on. Mark was talking to Adie, so he was fully occupied and I didn't need to watch him closely. I just kept going back to the little table where there was a platter of Jat's biscuits with cheese and gherkins and little pickled onions, and getting more. But I took the pickled onions off because I didn't like the taste, then hid them behind the record player. Dad was telling Vonnie and Jeannie about the glass swans he could blow, but I don't think they believed him. Elvie overheard their conversation because she'd seen him making them once before, said, "No, Johnny's really clever. There's hardly anyone else in Adelaide who can do what Johnny can." The more Elvie kept going on about how clever he was, the more animated he became. It was nearly 10 o'clock when he said to me, "Geoff, go out to the shed. Bring me in a length of the clear half-inch tubing and a small piece of the red and the yellow tubing too, and grab the bench torch, and a bit of that brown rubber tubing and the small shifting spanner. After that, you can bring in the old Electrolux vacuum cleaner and the suction pipe with that adapter I made for it. I'll blow some swans for the ladies." I lugged all the gear into the kitchen within a few minutes, but had to go back out again to grab him a 3-cornered file so he could cut the glass. It took me a while to find one because the shed was really messy. When I got back, he'd hooked up the bench torch. He had some of the brown rubber tubing running from under the gas stove to the torch. He was starting to connect the blower end of the vacuum cleaner to the torch with the adapter, and I had to go back out again and bring in the insulation tape so he could get it to seal. Once he had done that, he struck a match and lit up the torch. Then he started to adjust the gas and air levers until he got the colour of the flame to a soft blue. The ladies moved back a bit after he lit the torch. I think they might have been a bit scared he was going to blow the joint up. "Did you bring me in a cork?" he asked. "You didn't tell me you wanted one," I replied. "Hop out and get one pronto. Come on, I'm ready to go." When I came back in, he had Mum's asbestos simmer pad on top of the sink, alongside where he was working. He ran the file around the length of the clear glass tubing and then showed the ladies how easy it was to snap it and get a clean edge. He put a cork into one end of the tubing and went to work, twirling the glass between his thumbs and pointer fingers over the raw flame. Dad wore a wristwatch with a sweep hand, but for his whole life he wore it with the face of the watch on the inside of his wrist. This was because the technical nature of glass blowing demanded precise timing. His palms faced upwards and his face was full of concentration as he twirled the glass around until it was red hot and glowing. Then he brought the length of tubing to his mouth and started to blow a ball from the molten glass. He kept moving in and out of the flame, gradually blowing and expanding the ball until it resembled the size of a tennis ball. Bonnie and Jeannie were amazed at his skill and dexterity and were nudging one another and whispering little comments back and forth. Elvie said, "I told you Johnny was clever. Did you know that a couple of years ago he used to make all the scientific glassware for Oliphant Laboratories?" Once Dad had formed the body of the swan, he began to reheat the glass on the longest end where the tube met the body. When it was red hot and molten, he swept the tubing out and upwards into a graceful curve, drawing the tubing out and pulling it back up to create the neckline of a swan. Then he reheated the ball on what would be the underside. When the temperature was right, he pressed the hot glass down on Mum's simmer pad and fashioned a flat base for it to sit on. By this stage, everyone was in awe of Dad's artistic ability, and even the men had brought their beers into the kitchen to watch him work. "I'm going to have a drink," he said, never being a man who would let work interfere with his drinking. He defended his position by telling the crowd that the tubing had to cool a little before he could begin to handle it again. After a quick beer, he moved the cork to the opposite end of the tubing, reheated the glass and carefully blew the head of the swan. He then reheated the tubing in front of the head and drew the glass out to fashion a beak. After another beer and quite a few accolades, he heated the tube at the back of the swan and drew the molten glass upwards to create its tail. I then passed him the yellow glass and he added some colour to define its beak. And then it was a red glass and he spotted in a pair of eyes before resting the swan down on its base upon the simmer pad. "That's for you, Vonnie," he said. "And don't worry, I'll make a swan for all you ladies tonight. No one is going home empty-handed." But he also blew one for me, for being his TA. After taking all the equipment back to the shed, I sat my swan on the mantelpiece above the open fireplace. Soon after that I was caught rubbing my eyes, and Mum said she thought it best that I go to bed now. It was nearly midnight, and she said she was happy to change the records as need be. In the morning when I got up, there were dirty glasses, empty bottles and full ashtrays scattered around the lounge room. I went over to the mantelpiece and had a really good look at my swan. I named him Sammy. Then I started flicking his body with my index finger. I loved the ping sound it made. I flicked him the same way I used to flick Theo at school when he was annoying me or when I wanted to get his attention. After doing it several times though, one of my flicks was far too hard. Sammy's belly shattered into tiny thin shards of glass and his broken neck lay on the mantelpiece, one of his red eyes looking up at me. Dad wasn't going to be happy.